famous of all, the television themes, the local television themes, that for in Melbourne tonight. And here's the man responsible. I don't know so much whether he started the program, but certainly he was a pioneer in television, had a lot to do with it in the early days. Norm Spencer, good evening and welcome.
Hello, Bruce. How are you?
Lovely to hear that theme again, Norm.
Yes, and I did start it.
Oh, yes, it was your inspiration. There's no doubt about that. But before we talk television, I think we should go way back to the 3DB days, because I understand, Norm, that perhaps you started in the record library there as a youngster.
I started before that. I started 3KZ.
Did you really?
Yes, and with Bruce Mansfield's uncle.
Terry Deer was what, studio manager?
One of the top announcers at that time. Terry Deer and Banks were the two announcers at 3KZ.
What year, Norm?
Yes, you're asking questions. I was 13, 1936.
Well, tell us those days. What do they do? A lot of live shows?
Well, they used to, yes. Banks used to do a lot of live shows. He did Voice of the People, Voice of the Voyager. What was the other one? Oh, some others. He used to do the Kia-Ora Sports Parade and all those. Banks was everywhere and Terry was everywhere.
Had Patterson's Family Quiz started by that time?
I'm not sure, but the P&A Parade was on.
How was he to work with, Norm?
Who, Banks?
Yes.
I found him very good. He was... Terry was marvellous. I've got to say, Terry was very good to me and looked after me very well. But I found Banks pretty good too. He was a wild boy. Don't make a mistake in those days.
Oh, yes, a few of them were.
Yes, they certainly were.
Who else was on the announcing staff there, Norm, before the war? Can you recall?
Who was on it?
Who was on the announcing staff, apart from Terry Deer, Norman Banks and Eddie Barmer?
Donovan Joyce, Kendrick Hudson. I was there before Norm Swain, strange enough.
Well, the move from 3KZ to 3DB, how did that happen, Norm?
Well, I just happened to sock an announcer and break 50 records, so I suppose that doesn't help.
What, you really belted somebody?
Oh, yes. The breakfast announcer came in. He was late. I'd done breakfast for about half an hour. I was busy logging the records, and he whacked me behind the ear. I think just in fun, perhaps, but he bounced my nose off the table.
Is he alive today, Norm?
No, he's dead, I think. I haven't seen him.
Oh, you didn't kill him, Norm, did you?
No, not quite.
I thought you just bruised him.
I almost killed KZ. He fell back and broke 50 records, and they had to pay for him. It nearly broke their heart.
78s in those days, of course.
78, yeah.
So who was your boss?
Well, Norm Barmer was, actually. He's still alive.
Yes, he is.
And he was a great man, and he actually recommended me to 3DB.
And did you go across there in the same capacity originally, Norm?
No, I went there for 3 weeks and stayed there for 18 years. But I went there just, filing records back in the library and so forth.
So you must have been a kid that latched onto things. You were pretty forward-thinking in those days.
Well, I don't know whether I was, but I had some wonderful bosses. When I went to DB, I had Stan Clark, who later became the managing director of Macquarie, of course.
Yes.
And Dave Worrell, I think, was one of the finest men I ever knew. He had an uncanny knack of knowing the public. And, he just could pick anything and just go bang, and it seemed to work.
I've heard that from so many people.
Unbelievable.
Did you go to air on 3DB?
No, I knew all I ever did was an old record program. No, I was program director, and that's about all.
You never had any ambitions, Norm, to be front of microphone or front of camera?
No, and strange enough, I'm still frightened of it in many cases. It worries me.
Norm Spencer, we've played the IMT theme. Have a listen to this theme.
Joining now, get your blues on the run. Hooray!
We've got fun, we've got laughter, we've got joy.
That, of course, was the Happy Gang theme. What are your memories there, Norm?
Well, what happened is I decided it was time we had a show. Instead of doing only just Test cricket, I decided it would be very good to have a weekly show with it. And I had Dick Cranbourne and John Stewart, who were very good. Eula Parker was the singer. And Lou DePano, the orchestra leader, and Maury Callard was in it, and all those people. And it was a sensation. It got the highest rating, I think, of any show at the time. It got about a 50-odd rating.
There was a time, Norm, when you were at 3DB, when you had a full resident orchestra as well, led by Bill Flynn.
Yes, we had that, and that was Sir Keith Murdoch's idea, and I tell you what, it cost us a fortune. The only time we ever made any money was when I recorded when the King died, and I recorded "God Save the Queen," and recorded a whole lot of themes for news and so forth.
Well, you've always had the magic touch. You always seem to know exactly what the public want, Norm. I've never known you to come up with a fizzer. You must be very proud of your track record.
Oh, I'm very proud of it, but I think it's your background. I learnt from fellas like Stan Clark and Dave Worrell and Banks and Deere and all those people. I listened and learnt. And I think it's light and shade, fast and slow. If you think of those things all along, I think you can get a fairly good idea of programming.
Norm Spencer, did you get the idea from the Happy Gang from an American radio program?
Oh, no. It was a thing we did ourselves. We did it with Test cricket in between, getting the reports back on who's been hit a 6 or hit a 4 and all that sort of thing.
Norm, in regards to Graham Kennedy, there are those who say, and I hope you take this in the spirit it's intended, there are those who say that you made Graham, but others have said, and perhaps unkindly, that Graham made you.
Well,
what have you got to say about that?
Well, I think it's both ways, and it doesn't worry me particularly, but all I know is he wasn't the first one I picked. I was going to take Cranbourne originally.
Just set up for people who are not aware of the story, how in Melbourne tonight, an institution in this city where everybody watched every night of the week, they just loved it. Tell us how it started and how you discovered this young Graham Kennedy as the compere.
Well, the whole story was that I wanted Dick Cranbourne originally from 3DB, and of course he wouldn't come across. He was in the Herald and he was getting on a bit anyway. But I don't know whether you know that Dick Cranbourne was a very good saxophonist,
Yep.
good singer, and he was the best ad-lib man I ever knew. So, naturally I wanted that type of man. Then I searched for him, then I looked at John McMahon and quite a few others, and I had the program already set to go. And all of a sudden, old Happy came up to me. Happy said, look, he said, I've got the bloke. He said, he's working with me, Graham Kennedy. So I said, well, look, we're doing the Red Cross appeal on Sunday. Why don't you put him on and let's see how he works? He worked with Happy on that show. I went and booked him then for £35 a week, which was, peanuts.
You recall, Norm, I wasn't with you in those days. We're talking about May 6, 1957.
That's right.
And the first show was absolutely terrific. But Graham tells me the second show was a disaster because you'd all put all your eggs in one basket.
Well, that always happens, of course, and I've always been wary of a second night. A second night's always a letdown. It happened when we started GDV too, and the second night was a disastrous. Films broke everywhere and the whole thing, but that always happens. And when you're going 5 nights a week, if you do have a bad night, you can pick it up the next night, and that was the beauty of it.
I suppose you'd have to congratulate a Graham Kennedy too for accepting the job that you offered him. Knowing his personality, as I and Phil do, he would be the first to say, no, look, I'll stay with you, Zed, where I'm comfortable. How did he react? Was he nervous?
Yes, very nervous. He used to walk up and down that prop area for hours, but I used to walk with him, and we used to plan a lot of things as we walked up and down. And there was no doubt he was nervous, but when he went on, the real Graham Kennedy was the one that went on air.
He was never a good interviewer, was he, Norma? He was never comfortable talking to people like, for example, Vivian Lee, who was out here.
No, he was never any good at interviewing, and he never could interview, and unfortunately in the early days we used to have to try and rely on that to make up for it. But as soon as we got a bit of money, and soon the real answer to in Melbourne tonight that really made it go, and Graham and all, was Joff Allen. And it was because Joff brought so much comedy. And that's the reason, and he brought everybody into it. And I think that's the thing that saved in Melbourne tonight. I don't know whether it would have lasted otherwise.
Norm, there was a time there when a cheeky Graham Kennedy, the boy next door, every mother's son, could get away with murder. There came almost halfway through his television career, then a self-confidence. I don't know whether it was management or somebody managing him, where he got all show business and very Hollywood and lost that wonderful Melbourne touch.
Yes, well, I've always said that when Graham first started, he'd go up to what I call a line, a fine line.
Yep.
Mind you, I used to have a talk back and everything else, and I'd go right through him if he didn't do anything else.
Oh, yeah.
But the point was that he'd go up to that line and never above it, and never go past it. Later, he went past it, and in my opinion, that's the difference between being a naughty boy and a dirty old man.
Norm, let's move on a little. After all those golden years at Channel 9, why did you turn your back on GTV and go across to Channel 7?
Packer? Does that answer it?
Yeah.
Why he made things too difficult for you? What, budget-wise or?
It's a funny thing, but Bednall had been a big newspaper man, and for years he'd been talking about Packer, and I had a run-in with Packer. I beat him to Maverick. You remember the show?
Yeah.
We're talking Sir Frank Packer now, of course.
Frank Packer, of course. And I met him in London after I'd beaten him to Maverick, and he abused me, and we nearly had a fight in Fleet Street, and I found out later he'd been a pretty good boxer. I'm glad I didn't have to fight him. But I never liked his style. I never liked the style of newspaper owners who didn't want television to work, to be quite frank. They wanted to hold it down for their newspapers. And I'm glad I left. If I hadn't left, I think there would have been a lot of trouble at Channel 9.
Norm, you swung punches, or punches were swung at you in many directions, including that of an overseas Western star.
Yeah.
Who's this, Hugh O'Brien, is it?
Yeah.
Oh, why do?
Oh, well, he put on a big performance when he was doing a show, and I went down and had a go at him, and he swung a punch, so I set him on his backside.
Was this it?
Ron Wilson not far behind me, so I wasn't too bad.
Was this the opening of the Teletheatre in North Fitzroy?
Oh, no, that was at GTV. That was at GTV.
Norm, you spoke about ratings with the Happy Gang, and of course ratings within Melbourne Tonight, but you also had great success. In fact, I think phenomenal figures, never before or since topped, and that was with the Seekers.
Yeah, the Seekers, I did 67 with that, and that's the highest rating of any show, but that was quite a funny one. Actually, I wanted to go overseas, and I've got to say that my years at 7 were like purgatory.
Why?
Well, because of the fact that at 9 I was able to do what I wanted to do and make everything go, and I don't think I would have been able to if I'd have stayed. Every time you wanted to do anything new or anything at 7, they had some problem, you know. And with the Seekers, I went out and sold it myself. I got Jack Neary to go over to England and fix up the Seekers. I planned the whole thing, went all around it, and they generously gave me $100 as a bonus.
Norm,
that was typical.
Did you actually open the Teletheatre for Channel 7 with Raymond Burr, was it?
No, it wasn't Raymond Burr, Bob Crosby.
Oh, Bob Crosby, right.
It was Bob Crosby. Raymond Burr came out later.
Yes.
But Bob Crosby was and we had Jimmy Edwards was the comic.
How do you feel you would survive today, Norman Spencer, with your wealth of knowledge in the 90s as a consultant to television stations generally? Could you stand it? Could you live with the political pressure? Or do you think you could come up with that Norman Spencer of old?
Well, I think you could come up with it, but I don't think anyone would spend the money these days, and the costs are too high, I think, Bruce. You'd never be able to, well, I suppose Hey at Saturday is very close to it in Melbourne Tonight, but I doubt whether you'd be able to come up with all the scenery and everything that we used to have in those days, and the ballets, and have a ballet on staff and a band on staff and all those arrangers on staff and everything else. It was a magic years, and I was lucky to go through that years, and I've never regretted it. And as far as I'm concerned, you know, I had the best orchestra leader in the business with Arthur Young. He was a fantastic musician who could give me anything I wanted. I had tremendous people on the floor with old Jimmy Alexander and Dale Max, and you know, those sort of people, and you could rely on them. And there was nothing that we couldn't do.
And yet, Norm, you turned your back on television before the colour television transition in the mid-70s. I bet you look at TV today and think, I'd do things differently. You'd look at, say, Tonight Live with Steve Izard and think, that's not the way I'd approach it.
Well, that's exactly right. I wouldn't. But, you know, that's a different era, and maybe I'm wrong. You know, I'm not exactly a boy anymore, but the point is that I think that it needs some professionalism and someone who knows the public. What happens in a lot of cases, you get into a little gang of television people and you forget what the ordinary people are doing. Even when I was at my height in television, I was playing cricket and things of that nature, and I used to get plenty of rubbishing from some of the mates, and particularly fellas that were bowling to me.
Norm, it's been a real delight speaking to you. We could elongate this for another hour with the stories, but they're so intertwined, and your road in television and radio is so varied, and it's been magic speaking to you.
Thank you very much, Bruce.
And of course, remember, you not only were executive producer of In Melbourne Tonight, you also directed the show. That'd be unheard of today, wouldn't it?
Yes, and I was also program director of the station.
Well, hats off to you, Norm.
Righto, Norm. Thanks for that.
My pleasure.
Good night.
Bye.